Our first speaker this evening is René Jax. René is from California. She is a former San Francisco police officer. She'll tell you more about that. She's now the author of 7 books. She worked for 25 years has worked for 25 years as a project manager for software, mostly for banks, and she's lived all over the world in 20 different countries. And she's also, fun fact, had food poisoning in 20 countries too. So.
Knock 'em dead, Jax. Hi, everybody. It's Thursday night here in New Hampshire? Well, out in California, they have their own time zones and everything, so thank you so much. Thank you so much. We had a great session with the legislators earlier in the day, and I see some of you did manage to come, and once again, I guess, when you fell asleep in the first session, you felt you needed to come back and hear it again. So when I was in school, they said you should always start a speaking engagement with a joke. Okay, so I'm going to tell a joke. So there's a lot of women here, so I'll say, a man walks into a doctor's office. And he says, "Doctor, I've been doing a lot of research on the internet, and I'm convinced my right lung has cancer." And the doctor says, "Yes." And he says, "Yeah, I've got cancer in my right lung, and I want you to remove my right lung." And the doctor looks at him and says, "Well, okay." And he says, "What's a good day for you?" He says, "Well, we're going on holiday. We're going to do a cruise. When I get back on the 26th, how about maybe the 29th? He says, "Well, see my secretary. And, when you get back, we'll do your blood work, and I'll take that lung out." Now, normally, when you hear something so ludicrous, you're waiting for the punchline. The punchline is this is a reality in the United States. Every day, 10 people a day are self-diagnosing their gender conditions and demanding, without any pushback from their psychiatrist or their doctors, to have perfectly healthy organs removed. Ba-bum-bum. There's your punchline. 10 people a day. Last year, 3,500 people in the United States had sex changes. That's your punchline. Now, when we talk about sex changes, and I'll go into more of this, to a lot of people, to legislators, this issue's purely academic. You might have one or two friends of a friend of a friend, and their kids are struggling, or their brother changed his sex or something. To me, this debate around sex changes is personal, because I am a transsexual. I was born male in 1955. I was confused by the time about my gender role by the time I was 6. By the time I'm 20, I'm living full-time on hormones. And I think I was 40 when I finally had enough money to have a sex change. So of all the people here, maybe not one or two of you, I have literally and figuratively flesh and blood in this debate. And surprisingly, I'm not going to be telling you what you think I, as a transsexual activist, am going to tell you. So my mother was schizophrenic, was committed to a mental health institute. My father was an alcoholic, abandoned my mother and us 3 kids. My brother and sister older than myself. Once my mother was by herself, she went into full schizophrenia and was committed to Fort Logan Mental Health Institute in Denver, Colorado. Because I was a little boy, there was no place for me. We were a poor family, so I spent most of my childhood accompanying her to Fort Logan, going to Wednesday night, Tuesday night, Saturday meetings. The nurses basically cared for me as a babysitter. And it was during this time that I read some of my first books on sexuality. I'm 10 years old. They put me in the medical library, and I'm reading books that I really shouldn't have read. And one of them was Harry Benjamin's book, The Transsexual Phenomena, released in 1969 by Harry Benjamin, who had been giving boys estrogen since 1947. By the time he finished his career, he had given over 4,000 boys estrogen treatments. So when they say I'm a police officer, I was the very first transsexual police officer in the world. In 1980, I was a male living with male anatomy, living as a woman, and I decided I wanted to help my community because there was a lot of anti-gay attacks, anti-transsexual attacks. I was very, very involved in the gay community, and I thought I could help by being a cop. And there was a legal loophole. After a year of fighting the San Francisco Police Department, I nailed him against the wall legally, and I got sworn in. For the next 3 years, my life was a living hell just from gender. The other officers were verbally, physically abusive, vandalized my car repeatedly, trashed my... If I dressed in the station house, they trashed my clothes. And what has damaged me from that was that I could never get a backup. Law enforcement only works when an individual feels it's not in his best interest to continue being a nasty person. Okay? So you need a couple uniforms. The more uniforms, the greater the risk of continuing to be a nut. So you go down to New York, and on their calls, they put 6 or 7. Well, when I'd call up on my radio, I don't know if they're still called PIC radios, the other cops, the straight cops, would mess with their radios, and I couldn't get a backup. And I kept getting injured because a lot of people, especially people on drugs, don't respect one uniform, and so you're always fighting. So eventually, I ended up in the hospital, unable to walk for about 6 months because of a fight, because I couldn't get a backup. And I have an intimate relationship with ceiling tiles. And when you can't walk and you've been abused, both as a transsexual police officer, your family's abandoned you. Everything that we need to feel part of a society has been stripped from you. You stare up at the ceiling, and I gotta use a profanity. What the hell was I thinking? So after that, I left the department. Once I was able to walk, I was thrown out of my apartment because I didn't have money. I lived in my car with a bad back for many, many months after that. I became a dominatrix, got addicted to crack cocaine. What else did I do? I had a good time. I don't remember most of it. And eventually went into project management. I had my sex change in 1990 at Dr. Stanley Biber. And you should understand the world as it was before transsexuality was weaponized by the left wing. And I fully believe it has been weaponized against the conservatives, against the religious people in our country. Is when I had my sex change, Dr. Biber was in business for 40 years in Trinidad, Colorado, and did 4,000 sex changes. That's 8 a month average. We're now talking 10 a day. Okay? And what's really interesting about transsexuality is I've been writing books now for many years, and as I'm facing the business end, the muzzle end of age 60, I said, I got to get down and really answer the basic questions. So I said the place to start is back in that medical library. So I did 3 long years of research recently. Looked at all of the medical texts, looked at all of the research papers that you hear quoted all over the place. And what I discovered, much to my own horror, because when I read it when I was 14, I trusted doctors. I trust doctors with a bottle of salt now. When I read these books when I was 15, I missed a major point, is they're prescribing treatments, they're prescribing surgeries, they're prescribing hormones, they're prescribing puberty blockers now. they don't know what causes it. This gentleman, just the other day, 2 weeks ago I think it was, this gentleman went to his doctor, and he's got a low grade temperature, and he's not feeling right. And he says, the throat, and the doctor, and we've all done this, the doctor says, well, you have a bacterial infection of unknown origin. And I'm going to give you some amoxicillin. You take the amoxicillin, and it doesn't do anything. And then you go back and he gives you Zithro. And then you go back and he gives you something else, and it turns out it was an abscess in the tooth. You know something? You can stop taking the erythromycin, and you can go back to a state previously. With sex change surgery, they don't know the cause of, and they're guessing. All my research proves this. My life experience of a half a century proves this. They're guessing at the treatment. And what I can definitely tell you is the treatment doesn't fix the anxiety. It does for like 3 weeks when you get home and you get to show your you get to show your new genitalia. I'm an old street cop, forgive me. You get to show, it's like all my friends said, this is really a lot more information than we wanted. And I said, listen, I just paid $25,000 for this holiday, and I'm going to show you the slides. I took pictures leading into the surgery room. The book I wrote is Don't Get on the Plane, and there's a picture of me going into the surgery suite. It's my feet like this. I took pictures, and the doctor said, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I've paid $25,000 for this ride, and I want to document it. If I went to France on the money, I'd have a picture of the bed in the hotel. So there's a moment of elation, but then you just crash again. And we know this to be true because there's been 3 solid scientific research papers over the past 25 years that show transsexuals have the highest suicide rate of all people on this planet. Do you know what the suicide rate for most people are? And those of you who heard it today, you can't say anything. Put your hand down. The suicide rate, I just looked it up, is 0.6% of the population. 0.6% of the population. And the transsexual movement, the trans activists say, hold it. That's because our mothers don't love us, because there's not legislation protecting us, and because they're southern bigots driving pickup trucks with the Confederate flag in the back, chasing little transies down the street. What it is not bigotry, but biology. Our biology is a binary sex biology, too. There's some other stuff, but it's 2. And you say, well, there's gender. Let me explain gender to you folks. John Money was an Australian from Wellington, and he came up here and he was doing research. He was the first doctor who really looked at this condition scientifically. In 1955, he wrote a paper identifying gender as a concept to convey this confusion he saw in his patients. 14 years later, Harry Benjamin wrote The Transsexual Phenomena, in which he extrapolated and did a nice little chart. He loved charts, which showed the range of gender. Then the following year, Robert Jesse Stoller wrote his book, Sex and Gender. And Benjamin was too old school. He came from Germany. He was Jewish. English was not his first language. Robert Jesse Stoller was a true American scientist, and his lingo resonated with the American society. So when he wrote his second book, The Transsexual Phenomena, in which he said gender is a range of things and a rainbow, it caught on in the lay person. It caught on, and now we believe that gender can be separate from anatomy. There has been no scientific research, hard science, that indicates anything like that. Nobody's done it because it's just accepted as truth. So let me put on my glasses, look at my notes, because I only have a few minutes. You can tell that being a transsexual has its issues, and the reason we have the highest suicide rate ever, other than maybe dentist with 5 wives and is about to divorce his 6th wife, is that it's post-surgical. And how many of you, and I believe in my heart that African Americans have been discriminated and face discrimination? Yeah. How about Hispanics? Absolutely. How about gay men? Absolutely. Women in corporate culture have been discriminated against. Why is their suicide rate not above 0.6? And transsexual suicide rate, after they get what they want, after we get what we want, is every other person. Now, look at this room. We've got 100 people here. Everybody, you've all had sex changes. Every person on this side of the room will attempt suicide. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, suicide, no, yes, no, yes, no. We are talking every other person sitting next to you attempting suicide. It is a mental health issue. All of my friends, and I've been deep involved with the transsexual community, have mental illness. And so when you hear them say, well, it's because we're not loved by our mothers. No. It's because there's other things going on here that medicine has dropped the ball. So the solution, the first thing to stop this epidemic, and it looks from all indication to double every year for the foreseeable future. There's 3,500 this year. Next year, we're looking at 8,000 in the U.S. In the U.K., they are getting 50 gender teenagers every day wanting sex changes. This is epidemic, and the AMA won't talk about it, the APA won't talk about it. And the solution, first and foremost, let's not create more. My solution is let's stop the surgical putting kids into the sex change system and prohibit kids under the age of 18 from having puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex changes. You have to stop. It's like you can't fix a dam. You can't deal with the flooding if you haven't fixed the dam. We have to stop the dam first and foremost. Why am I doing this? And a question that was asked earlier that I haven't been able to get to. 2 minutes? Can I have 2? 4 minutes. Oh boy, thank you. Why am I still living like this if I believe it's the wrong lifestyle? Walt Hayer, who is an excellent man, went through the same procedure a couple years earlier than I, went to Stanley Biber, had a sex change, lived for 10 years, and went back, realized this isn't it, and he went back to living as a man. And he got married. I think he has a ministry. He is a great guy. He leads a transition group. People in the trans community, the gay activists, say he wasn't really a transsexual. He was a transvestite. He was a cross-dresser. And when I wrote, Don't Get on the Plane, Sex Change Can Ruin Your Life, I'm reading all of the blogging, the nasty, vicious blogging about Walt. And I said, people have got to see, I've got 50 years of dealing with this, 40 years cross-living. I've got breast implants. They're 25 years old. My health from 40 years of hormones, massive doses of female hormones, has destroyed my body. Most women go on hormone replacement therapy when they're 60, 65, 70. I went on when I was 17, and my body is decaying. My doctor the other day said I'm the equivalent of a woman 100 years old that's been on estrogen for 40 years. My eyes, I've got problems. And it's related to all of these drugs. It's related to having breast implants. It's related to having to overdose on estrogen to hide my masculinity. Not that my personality helps in any way. So, listen, I'm here to be an advocate for our children. Let's stop the epidemic. Let's stop the dam from flooding us first. We need your support. Shannon and her group need your support. David, from a therapeutic perspective, is here to lend support. This woman is amazing, Stephanie, and she understands the legalities that they're trying to push down our throats. My mother, who rejected me after I came out to her, never talked to me up until the time she died. I saw her a day before she died. She said, when a person takes the time to tell you the truth, please listen. Thanks.